The snow had been falling since noon, soft and relentless, the kind that muffled the whole world into silence. I sat at a corner booth inside a small diner on the edge of Burlington, Vermont, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Outside, the streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting pale halos through the frosted glass. I had been rehearsing the words for 2 weeks. I had written them down, crossed them out, written them again. I knew exactly how I was going to say it, exactly which moment I was going to choose. Tonight felt right. Tonight, I was finally going to tell my boyfriend, Daniel, that I was pregnant. He slid into the seat across from me, shaking snow from his jacket, his phone already in his hand. He glanced up briefly, offered a distracted smile, and set the phone face down on the table. I noticed he didn't turn it all the way off. "Hey," he said. "Sorry I'm late, work thing." "It's fine," I said, even though I had been sitting there for 40 minutes. He flagged the waitress, ordered a burger, and spent the next few minutes talking about a client call that had run over. I nodded, waiting for the right pause, the right breath between sentences. My fingers pressed flat against the table. The words were right there, sitting behind my teeth. Then his phone buzzed. He flipped it over, glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his face. A tightness around the jaw. A decision being made. "Actually," he said, setting the phone back down slowly, "there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." I felt the air change before he said another word. "Sarah." His voice was careful, measured. The voice of someone who had also been rehearsing. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About us. About where this is going." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I care about you. I want you to know that. But I don't think I can keep doing this. I'm not in the same place you are. I don't want the same things." I stared at him. "What things?" He exhaled. "A future. The kind you've been picturing. The house, the settling down." He shook his head. "I'm not ready for that. I don't know if I ever will be. And it's not fair to keep you waiting when I already know." The diner noise continued around us, forks against plates. Someone laughing 2 booths over. The coffee machine hissing. I sat perfectly still, my hands flat on the table, and said nothing, because if I opened my mouth right then, the only thing that would come out was, "I'm 8 weeks pregnant." And I couldn't say it. Not like this. Not to someone who had just told me he didn't want a future with me. The word felt suddenly enormous and fragile, like something I needed to protect from him. He waited for me to respond. When I didn't, he reached into his wallet, pulled out 2 20s, and set them on the table. "Dinner's on me," he said quietly. "I really am sorry, Sarah." He stood. He buttoned his coat. He walked out into the snow. I didn't move for a long time. The waitress came and went. The food he had ordered arrived and sat untouched. I pressed one hand against my stomach beneath the table, just holding it there, and stared at the falling snow through the glass until everything outside blurred into white. My apartment felt smaller when I got home. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, still in my coat, and looked at the space where his things used to live on my dresser. A watch he had left. A book he had lent me months ago and never asked back. I sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time that night, I let myself cry. Not the quiet kind. The deep, hollow kind that comes from somewhere you didn't even know was that empty. In the morning, I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and distracted the way it always was before 9 a.m. I told her everything. About the diner. About Daniel leaving. About the pregnancy. There was a silence on the line that felt longer than it was. "Oh, sweetheart," she finally said. And then, after another pause, "Are you sure about the dates? Because you two haven't exactly been stable for a while, and..." "Mum, I'm just saying, you're 28, you're still building your career. The timing isn't." "I'm keeping it," I said. My voice surprised me. It came out steadier than I felt. Another silence. "Well," she exhaled. "Your father and I have the Miller's anniversary party this weekend, so I can't come up until maybe the following." I set the phone down on the nightstand while she was still talking. Not to be cruel, just because I had heard everything I needed to hear. I went to work that Monday, and the Monday after that, and the one after that. I was a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic in Burlington, and my patients needed me to be present and focused, so I was. I learned very quickly that grief respects no schedule. It slips in during lunch breaks, in the car on the way home, in the shower at 6 in the morning when there is no one else to hear it. I cried in those places, and only those places. At work, I was fine. At work, I had a reason to keep moving. The weeks passed. My body changed in ways I had read about but not fully understood until they were happening to me. The exhaustion was oceanic. The nausea struck without warning, in the middle of patient sessions, in the cereal aisle of the grocery store, once during a staff meeting that I excused myself from with what I hoped was a convincing smile. I told no one at work. I told almost no one at all. The secret sat inside me alongside the pregnancy itself, both of them growing quietly, both of them mine. It was my Aunt Claire who found out. She called in late November, the way she always did, just to catch up, her voice warm and unhurried in the way that only hers ever was. My aunt lived alone in a small house in coastal Maine, outside of a town called Rockport, where she had been a nurse practitioner for over 20 years before she retired. She had never married, never had children, but she had a way of making everyone she loved feel like the most important person in the room. I had spent 2 summers with her as a teenager after my parents' divorce got particularly bad, and I had never forgotten what it felt like to be in her house. Safe. Unhurried, held. I don't know why I told her. Maybe it was the way she asked how I was, not as a formality, but as a real question, with silence built in afterward for the real answer. I said I was fine, and she said, "Are you, really?" And something inside me came loose. I told her everything, all of it. Daniel. The diner. My mother's response. The pregnancy. The months I had been carrying all of it alone. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment, and then she said, simply, "Come to Maine, Sarah. Come stay with me for a while. I can't just leave. You have vacation time, I know you do, because you never use it. Aunt Claire. I have a spare room with a good mattress and I make excellent chowder. Come." I laughed for the first time in weeks. It came out a little broken, but it was real. I drove up on a Friday evening in early December, the highway narrowing to 2-lane roads. As I got closer to the coast, pine trees pressing in on either side. The Atlantic visible in dark silver flashes between the hills. When I pulled into her driveway, the porch light was on and the front door opened before I even turned off the engine. She met me halfway down the path, and when she hugged me, I smelled wood smoke and her familiar lavender soap, and I was 22 years old again, arriving at her door with a duffel bag and a broken heart, finding out that some places in the world just hold you without requiring anything in return. "You look tired," she said, cupping my face in both hands. "I feel tired," I admitted. "Good. That means you can finally rest." The house was small and warm and exactly as I remembered it. Bookshelves in every room. Sea glass collected in bowls on windowsills. A kitchen table worn smooth from years of use. She had made chowder, as promised, and we sat up past midnight eating it and talking not about the pregnancy, not about Daniel, but about everything else, books she had read. A neighbor's dog she had started walking. A patient from her nursing years she still thought about sometimes. She talked, and I listened, and my shoulders came down from somewhere near my ears, and by the time I finally went to bed, I felt like I could breathe in a way I hadn't in months. We talked about the real things over the next few days, slowly, in pieces. She never pushed. She asked questions in the way that good nurses and good aunts do, not to extract information, but to make space for it. And in that space, I began to say out loud the things I had only been thinking in the dark. "I'm scared," I told her one morning, both of us sitting on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the water through the trees. "I don't know how to do this alone." She looked at me steadily. "You won't do it alone," she said. "I'm right here." I turned to look at her. She meant it. It wasn't reassurance offered carelessly, it was a statement of fact. I'm retiring anyway, she continued. I have nothing but time and a house by the sea. You can work remotely when the baby comes, your clinic allows it for some cases. And when you need someone, I'm here. I felt the tears come before I could stop them. Not the hollow grief tears from the diner. Something different. Something that felt, for the first time, like relief. My daughter was born in late July, in the middle of a heat wave that rolled up the Maine coast and settled there like it owned the place. Aunt Claire drove me to the hospital at 3 a.m, one hand on the wheel, the other patting my arm every few minutes, telling me I was doing great. That I was the most prepared person she had ever known, that everything was going to be fine. I believed her, even through the pain, because she was the kind of person whose certainty made other things certain. They placed my daughter in my arms just before dawn. She was pink and furious and absolutely real. She had a full head of dark hair, which the nurses said was unusual, and she gripped my finger with a force that seemed disproportionate to her size. I looked at her for a long time without saying anything, just memorizing her face, the small perfect nose, the way her mouth worked even in sleep, the weight of her against my chest. I named her June. For the month I had first heard her heartbeat. For the way the word felt in my mouth. Warm, brief, complete. The months that followed were the most exhausting and most alive I had ever felt. I learned things about myself I hadn't known were there. A patience I hadn't expected. A ferocity that surprised me sometimes, a deep, wordless refusal to let anything harm what I had built. Aunt Claire was there every step of the way, not hovering, but present. She took June in the mornings so I could sleep, she cooked while I did nighttime feeds. She sat with me at the kitchen table on the hard nights when the loneliness crept in, and she never minimized it, never told me to look on the bright side before I was ready to look anywhere but down. I returned to part-time work when June was 4 months old, doing telehealth sessions from the small desk in Aunt Claire's spare room while June napped. My clinic had been more flexible than I had expected, and I was grateful in a way that made me realize how often I had underestimated people. Not everyone disappoints you. I had spent enough time expecting that they would. The days found a rhythm. Morning walks along the water trail behind the house, June bundled against my chest in the carrier, the sea air cold and clean. Afternoons at the clinic by video call, the baby monitor on the desk beside my laptop. Evenings in Aunt Claire's kitchen, the two of them at the table while I made dinner, June in her high chair, batting at a spoon with extraordinary seriousness. My mother called occasionally. She was warmer now, in her way, and she had sent a card when June was born, and a small stuffed rabbit that June had quickly become attached to. We were finding something, my mother and I, not exactly what I had wanted from her, but something, a different shape of a relationship. I was learning, slowly, to want the things that were actually available to me, rather than the versions I had invented in my head. June learned to crawl on a Thursday in April. She took her first steps 11 months after she was born, wobbling across the kitchen floor toward Aunt Claire, who was sitting in her chair and crying openly before June even made it halfway. I stood by the counter with my hand pressed to my mouth, laughing and crying at the same time, thinking that I would never forget the way that room looked in that moment, the afternoon light through the window, the smell of the soup on the stove, June's face completely concentrated and completely triumphant. She was mine. She had only ever been mine. And that no longer felt like loss. The following spring, June was almost 2, and I had been offered a full-time position at a rehabilitation clinic in Rockport, 20 minutes from Aunt Claire's house. I took it without hesitation. I had stopped thinking of Rockport as temporary. It was home now, in the way that only the places you choose ever really are. The clinic was small, staffed by 8 people, and one of them was a man named Owen Marsh. He was a physical therapist like me, tall and quiet-spoken, with the particular calm of someone who had made peace with patients a long time ago. He had moved to Maine from Portland 3 years earlier, after a divorce he mentioned once and didn't dwell on. He brought coffee for the whole staff on Mondays without being asked. He stayed late to finish his notes without complaining about it. He laughed easily and without performance. We became friendly gradually, the way coworkers do, conversation over lunch, shared frustration over a difficult case. The kind of small exchanges that build up so slowly you don't notice them stacking until one day you realize they have become the thing you look forward to most in the workday. He met June at the clinic summer picnic, a low-key gathering in the parking lot behind the building with folding chairs and a cooler of lemonade. June, at 22 months, approached strangers with the fearless curiosity that was entirely her own personality, and she walked directly up to Owen, held out a piece of her cracker, and waited to see what he would do. He accepted it very seriously, examined it, and said, "This is an excellent cracker, thank you." June considered this response, nodded with satisfaction, and walked back to me. I caught Owen's eye over her head, and we both laughed, and something shifted quietly in that moment, the way things sometimes do when you aren't watching for them. We had coffee after work for the first time in September, at a place on the harbor that June loved because they kept a small jar of stickers at the counter. Owen talked about his work, his family back in Portland, a hiking trail he had discovered the previous weekend. He asked real questions and listened to the actual answers. He didn't perform attention, he paid it. I was careful, I won't pretend I wasn't. The scar from the diner in Burlington wasn't gone, it had just healed over into something that no longer bled but still existed under the surface. I kept my guard close. I moved slowly. Owen seemed to understand this without being told, and he never pushed, never crowded the space I needed, and showed up the same way every time, steady, easy, real. By December, he was having dinner with us once a week. By February, it was twice. By March, June was calling him by name and dragging him to see her drawings with the same authority she applied to everything else in her life. One evening in May, we were walking the trail behind Aunt Claire's house, June between us holding both our hands and demanding to be swung forward every 30 seconds. The sun was going down over the water, painting everything gold and soft, and Owen stopped walking and looked at me in a way he hadn't before. "I know you've been through a lot," he said. "And I know you don't need anything from me. You've already figured out how to do all of this without anyone." He paused. "But I'd really like to be part of it, if you'll let me." I looked at June, who had crouched down to examine something in the grass with intense scientific focus. Then I looked at Owen. "Okay," I said. "Simple as that. Because some things, when they're right, don't need more words." We didn't rush anything. We were both people who had learned to value slow. But by the following spring, it felt as natural as anything in my life had ever felt. He was good with June in the quiet, unglamorous ways that matter, consistent, kind, unhurried. He didn't try to be her father, he just showed up and let her decide what he was, and she decided, in her own time and on her own terms, that she liked having him around. That was enough. That was everything. Aunt Claire watched all of it with the satisfied expression of someone who had never doubted how it would go. I was 31 when June started preschool. She walked in on the first day in small red sneakers with her backpack that was almost as big as she was, and she turned around at the door, gave me a very confident wave, and went inside without looking back. I stood on the sidewalk outside, completely useless with pride, my sunglasses doing nothing to hide the fact that I was crying. I drove to work thinking about how much had changed, and how much had been worth it, and how none of it had looked the way I expected, and how that had turned out to be the best part. 2 weeks later, I was covering for a colleague and saw an outpatient on my schedule I didn't recognize. "New referral," the note said. "Post-surgical knee." I pulled up the intake form before the appointment and stopped. The name on the form was Daniel Rowe. I sat with that for a moment. Then I stood up, straightened my lanyard, and went to the waiting room. He was older, of course he was, it had been almost 4 years. His hair was shorter. He was wearing a wedding ring. He stood with the careful stillness of someone in real pain, leaning slightly on one side. When he saw me, his face went through several things in quick succession. Recognition, surprise, then something I couldn't quite name. "Sarah," he said. "Hi, Daniel," I said. "Come on back." I did my job. I assessed his range of motion, reviewed his post-op notes, explained the protocol. I was professional and thorough and completely present. He answered my clinical questions and I answered his. We did not talk about Burlington or the diner or the snow or anything that happened 4 years ago. Toward the end of the session, while he was doing a straight leg raise and staring at the ceiling, he said quietly, "I heard you had a daughter." "I do," I said. A pause. "Is she?" He stopped. "She's mine," I said simply, and moved to the next exercise. He nodded. He didn't ask anything else. I don't know what he was hoping I would say, or whether he was hoping for anything at all. It didn't matter. The question he had almost asked had no claim on my life anymore. When the session ended, he thanked me at the door. He meant it, I could tell, and I accepted it without bitterness and without warmth, the way you accept something from a stranger who happens to share a language with you. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened my notes. My phone lit up with a text from Owen. "Picking June up today if that's still okay. She requested tacos for dinner. Seems non-negotiable." I smiled at the screen, a real smile, unguarded, the kind that just happens. I typed back, "It is absolutely non-negotiable. Don't fight it." I finished my notes. I closed the file. I thought about Daniel for approximately 30 more seconds, not with anger, not with longing, just with the mild distance of someone looking back at weather that had passed. He had been real, and he had been painful, and he had shaped certain things. But he had not broken me. He had not even come close. What had come from that night, in the Burlington diner, from the cold and the snow and the wordless walk home, was June, was Rockport. Was Aunt Claire's kitchen and the trail along the water and the steadiness of Owen's presence. Was the version of myself that had learned, slowly and without shortcuts, that the life you build alone is something no one can take from you, because it belongs to you in a way that nothing simply given ever does. I drove home in the late afternoon light, the highway quiet, the coast flickering silver through the trees. I could hear June, before I even had the front door fully open, her voice at full volume, reporting something urgent about her day to Owen, who was listening from the kitchen with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered to him. "Mom!" She barreled into the hallway, still in her backpack. "Owen says tacos, but I want to put the cheese on myself. Tell him I can do the cheese." "She can do the cheese," I confirmed. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish towel over his shoulder, one eyebrow raised in theatrical surrender, 2 against 1. "Noted." I laughed, and the sound filled the hallway, clear and unhurried and completely free. Aunt Claire was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and her book, and she looked up just long enough to meet my eyes with an expression that said everything without saying a word. June had already escaped back to the kitchen to take control of the cheese situation. I hung up my jacket and followed the noise and the warmth, and I thought, this is it. Not the version I had imagined in that diner booth, my hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, the snow falling outside. Not the life that had been interrupted. A different one. A better one. The kind that only becomes possible when the first one falls apart. I walked into the kitchen. Everyone was there. That was enough.